Hi there, it's Marin Base with Grants Magic U, and I'm so excited to welcome you to join me in a conversation around a topic that I absolutely love, and I know it's top of the mind for you as well. Making friends with funders, what grant makers want every grant seeker to know before you submit a proposal. Now, I can promise you one thing. Whatever level of experience you have in the grants world, there will be surprises ahead in this session for you. And I know that's true because what I'm really going to be doing more than anything else in this session is pulling back the curtain that tends to divide what we know as grant seekers about the world on our side and what actually happens on the other side, if you will. Sometimes I call it inside the black box, that mystery world where the decisions are actually made, where the reviewers, the funders, the decision makers are actually engaging with the proposals and making choices and decisions about which ones are going to get funded. Something mysterious happens there, and we can't see it from our side, and that's what I want to be doing for you. It's part of what I've been engaging in the last several months around something that I call 3D thinking in our grant seeking. And I want to start with an exercise to give you a bit of a taste of what we're talking about here. And I want to warn you, there's a lot of audience participation ahead for you here. So on the screen in front of you, you see what? A gray rectangle. And on that rectangle, you see 3 gray circles. What is that, you're asking? What are you doing, Marin? Well, what I want to do is ask you, what do you think it could be? As you take a look at that abstract shape, think to yourself, what could that be? If that were something other than a flat rectangle with 3 gray circles on it, what might that something be? And go ahead actually and pause the recording and take about 30 seconds or more if you'd like to and jot down as many ideas as you and your team can. If you're there with somebody else's, it's a great exercise and lots of fun to do together. Come up with as many fun and creative examples of what you think this might be as you possibly can. And then come back to the recording and I'll share with you what I see when I look at that and how that really opens up our 3-dimensional thinking. Okay, go ahead and pause, have some fun, and come right back. All right, what kinds of things did you come up with here? Sometimes people see a Lego block. Sometimes people see a domino. Sometimes people have something like one of those big placards that you see at the county fair that's painted on one side with the bodies of pirates or clowns or something and holes that you poke your head through so you can look like a pirate or a clown. What did you come up with? What's the most creative idea that you came up for what this might be? And does it by any chance look anything like this? What is this? Well, this is a mama elephant. And she's walking across the savanna and the grass and the trees around here. And you see the sky and the clouds, and coming right along behind her is her little baby. And you might imagine there's a whole herd of other elephants all around her as well. And we know what the savanna is like, so we can imagine there are lakes and rivers. There are other wild animals. Maybe there are baboons up in those trees. So what does that have to do with the shape there that you see? Well, if the mama were standing on a plate glass and all you could see from underneath were her 3 feet, 1, 2, 3 feet, where they intersect with that glass, that's what that would look like. Can you see that now? Can you take a look at the picture on the right and see where her feet are? And imagine that she's standing on a plate of glass, grayed glass, and you're looking at her from underneath, and all you see of her, all you see of the entire world that she inhabits are those 3 circles where her feet are pressing against the glass. Now, from your side of the glass, all you know is that you're looking at a rectangle with 3 circles on it. But look at the vast and rich and diverse world, the ecology, the system, the inhabitants of what's going on the other side. That is completely invisible to you. And that's the thing. We see what we see, and we make assumptions about what we see. We make sense of what we see without always understanding everything that's actually going on the other side. That's what 3D thinking is all about. And that's where we want to go as we start to talk about what would it mean to bring 3D thinking to our work in the grants profession. So keep this mama elephant and her little baby and her entire world in mind as we begin to imagine what else might be going on over there that's showing up like this for us. It's showing up like three circles on a rectangle. What else might be going on over there that we're seeing like this? How else might we make sense of what we're seeing when we can't see the whole thing? What I want to do is start by sharing a perspective that can be really, really helpful in moving us out of a one-dimensional way of thinking about our grants world. I want to make sure you see the workbook page reference down there in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. That'll keep you up with me in your handout materials, which I hope you have close to hand. One way of expanding our perspective on the work we're doing in the grant-seeking world is to think about it as a landscape. Just as our mama elephant and her little baby are trudging through a unique landscape, we are also engaging in a unique landscape when we engage in grant-seeking. And I like to call that landscape the grantsmanship game. I like to think about this, and I like to teach it as if we were playing a game, and definitely playing to win. This isn't frivolous. This isn't a silly little thing. This is a very important work we're doing, and we want to win. So what does it mean to think about grant seeking, grant writing? Maybe even just the shift in thinking from grant writing to grantsmanship is a big shift for you in terms of opening up the perspective about the work that we're doing. But what do we need to have and understand in order to be successful at playing any game? Well, the first thing we need to have is a game board, and that's exactly what you see here on the slide, and that's exactly what you see on page 2 in your workbook. It's what I imagine the grantsmanship game board would look like. It's the unique operating environment on which we play this game. You know, every game has its own unique operating environment, right? You don't play checkers on a baseball diamond. You don't play Monopoly on a football field, right? So the grantsmanship game has its own unique operating environment as well, and inside that environment, there are specific ways that we are allowed to move around and allowed to move forward. And these are directed by what? The rules. Rules are not guidelines. Rules are not suggestions. Rules are those fundamental non-negotiables about which we can say, no matter what game we're playing, if we don't follow these rules, not only will we not win, we will probably actually get knocked out of the game completely. So half the battle in the grantsmanship game is to stay on the game board all the way through and not get knocked off along the way by violating one of the rules. What else do we need to have to be successful in playing and winning any game at all? Well, I have a question for you. Do you play chess? I don't. I know how to play chess. I know what the game board looks like, right? 64 squares. I got that. I know what the rules are. I know what all the pieces are, and I know where they're allowed to move and how they're allowed to move. But what my mind has never really been able to grasp are what? Are you with me? The strategies. Strategies is how we bring our wisdom, our experience, our what we've learned from training, what we've learned from others, our intuition, our best instincts to bear on making decisions about the circumstances that confront us as we move around the game board. I'm not good at strategies around chess, but I've got a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom around strategies in the grantsmanship game, and that is all I teach. That's what I'm teaching when I come to you with a topic like making friends with funders or any of the other topics that we teach in Grants Magic U are the rules and the strategies. How do we accumulate wisdom, knowledge, know-how, intuition to make better decisions, more productive decisions that will help us be more successful overall? So on the grantsmanship game board, those larger rectangles that you see are the 5 rules of the grantsmanship game. And then those smaller boxes are all the strategies, the action areas, the task areas that move us through the game board as we play the grantsmanship game. It's also really important that we understand that in this game, as in any other, there's a lot that we can control. There's a lot that we can bring to the process that we can directly control or at least influence. And that's where we want to develop strength and efficiency and effectiveness and excellence at every stage of the way. But my friends, I have information that may be a surprise to you. In the grantsmanship game, there's also a lot that we cannot control. All the training in the world, all the experience in the world, all the wisdom in the world does not give us access to controlling everything that happens in the grantsmanship game. And I want to let you know that a lot of what we're going to be looking at inside this class, Making Friends with Funders, is about what we can't control. It's about what we can't control. Again, pulling back the curtain to take a look at what's going on or what could be going on in that black box, if you will, the world of the grant maker that's largely invisible to us from the world of the grant seeker. Just like the world of the mama elephant was largely invisible to us from our perspective, except for those footmarks, which we didn't even know were footmarks, right? Pulling that back and saying, here's some of what's really going on. And it's not that we can control it by knowing more about it. It's that we can be more effective in navigating around it. You'll see what I mean as we move forward a little bit. Now, if you're curious about what the 5 rules of the grantsmanship game are, again, I unpack the grantsmanship game in all of my workshop sessions through Grants Magic U. This is the fundamental framework from which everything I teach is taught in effective and successful grantsmanship. But as a shortcut, I've given you an article on pages 3 through 6 in your handouts that will really open up the grantsmanship game for you in a fun way. It's a quick and easy read. I encourage you to share it with your board members or with anybody else who needs a little bit of help understanding just how diverse and complex the whole grantsmanship world can really be. My gift to you. All right, so with the grantsmanship game board in mind, what I want to let you know is that everything we're doing on that grantsmanship game board pre-qualifies us for the final round. What happens when we get that proposal out the door? It's an A-plus proposal. It's a perfect match for what this particular funder is looking for. But something happens. Remember that black box I mentioned a minute ago? Something happens inside that black box that we can't see because we're on the grant seeker's side. The grant makers are in there doing something. We don't know what that is. What I want to share with you is a little bit more about what's going on in the minds of the grant makers, and I use quotation marks around that. You'll find out why in just a moment. That can help us understand the mysterious world of the black box, what happens on the other side. So I've been using the word grant makers. You've heard me talk about funders. This is the common language that you'll hear when you're working in the grants world, but I think it's worthwhile to step back in the context of making friends with funders and talk a little bit more about who we really mean. Number one, are we talking about the grant-making organization? If that's the case, then it's really important that we understand right up front that every single grant-making organization is unique in terms of its focus. It's unique in terms of its position in the community. It's unique in terms of its culture, its values, its preferences, and the way that it engages with nonprofits. Some are private, some are public, some are very large, some are very small, some have many, many focuses, some have a single focus. If you know one grant-making organization, you know one grant-making organization, and that's it. And my friend, I promise you that we know this, but we forget it. And that's why I keep getting questions that always start with the words, what do grant makers? Why do grant makers? When will grant makers? And it's like the only way to answer that question is it depends. Because why? Because every single grant-making organization is unique. Each one has its own preferences and its own personality. And there are something like 120,000 of them in the United States alone. That's a lot of uniqueness, right? The other question to ask is, are we talking about the organization, or are we talking about the individuals inside the organization who are doing work related to that organization's grant-making role? Now, this is a really important distinction because individuals think like individuals. And you're an individual, I'm an individual. The more we can understand that they think like we do, then the closer we come to really understanding what else might be going on inside that mysterious black box. So sometimes when we say grant makers, we're talking about the grant proposal reviewers, who may or may not be the ones who ultimately make the grant decisions. We may be talking about the people who make the ultimate grant decisions, who may or may not have read the complete proposal. And we're talking about perhaps the people who are the program officers, the gatekeepers, if you will, who manage and facilitate the whole process, who don't directly make the grant decisions themselves, but believe me, can have a lot of influence on how those grant decisions are made. And that's the role I play for the organization that I serve. We've got about $900,000 worth of federal funding that moves through my office, under my management, if you will, into the community in the form of grants to support teacher professional development in K-12 education. I don't make the grant decisions, but I staff the process for my community review team to read the proposals, make their recommendations, and then their recommendations, not the proposals, the recommendations go to the ultimate decision maker, who's the president of my organization. And she can accept the recommendations, she can pass on the recommendations, she can send them back for additional information or additional consideration. Each and every one of these roles could be contained in those quotation marks around the word grant maker. So at least 3 different levels in this organization: the program officer, the gatekeeper, the reviewers, the people who actually have eyes on the proposal and are doing the evaluation process. And then in many organizations, there's the final arbiter, if you will, the one who has to approve the final award decision. So who are we talking about when we say grant makers? Well, if we're talking about any one of those 3, then they're very different roles and responsibilities, and it's really important to keep that in mind. The last bullet point on this slide, the grant maker, friend or foe. What's that all about? Well, I am inviting everybody I talk to these days to take on the challenge of checking how we talk about grant makers and see if there's a way that some we say competitiveness or conflict or even a little bit of aggression creeps into our language. And I'm talking about simple things we probably say, many of us, every day. Why don't we go hit up the XYZ Foundation for X, Y, or Z? Language that sounds manipulative, language that says that we're going to wrest something away, that there's some way that we're going to do what it takes to get what we need, in a way that is not thoughtful about the relationship that we want to be creating, and certainly not thoughtful about the individuals that we're looking to work with inside the organization. So if we think about those individuals, and I'm happy to be the friendly face of the friendly program officer. That's one thing I know I am in the world to the people that I work with in my classes and workshops. You can think of me when you think of grant maker, and hopefully I'm approachable. Hopefully you find me friendly, warm, and helpful. And I want you to assume that that's the case for the individuals that you're going to be working with as well. You wouldn't come hit me up for something. You would invite me into or engage me in a way. So think about that. Does our language reflect a predisposition inside to perpetuate that us versus them kind of mentality? We're one down, they're one up, they've got the gold, they make the rules. How do we sort of sneak our way in there and get some of that gold for ourselves? Let's not do that. We're better than that. The conversation is bigger, far more important than that. Another way of thinking about this is to take a look at the grant maker's mission. What's the mission of the grant maker? Well, every organization that makes grant awards obviously has a specific focus for their dollars. We all know about that. We talk about mission match. What we're proposing to do in our grant proposals has to match the mission, the philanthropic mission of the funding organization. But there's another way to think about the grant maker's mission as well. I want to let you know, I know you know this. You know, so much of what I'm sharing inside this session, we already know it. We know it. It's common sense. It's part of our lived wisdom. And yet it's so easy for extraneous ways of thinking to get stuck to us, to kind of clog and obscure our clear thinking about these things. And what I'm going to share with you right now is an exaggeration. See if it resonates for you in some way. Do we tend to think of grant makers as ATM machines? All we need to do is figure out what the right code is and punch the right buttons, hit submit, and boom, out comes the grant. But it won't come out unless we can find the right code to punch. Grant makers are not ATM machines. Well, if it's not that, if it's not about finding the exact right code that's going to guarantee us the award, maybe it's more like a jackpot. It's like, well, it's really a crapshoot. You just keep plugging away, and you're going to lose, you're going to lose, you're going to lose. And suddenly, for some reason, you don't know why, everything lines up and you hit the jackpot and the money comes out and you have no clue what happened, except you just really are glad you got the money this time around. Grant makers are not jackpots. Here's what I heard a grant maker say once that has stayed with me for years, and I share it everywhere I go. There's a little story around this. This was one of those wonderful forums where nonprofit representatives come together, a large audience, and then there's a panel of grant maker representatives that are sharing with them what their particular organizations are interested in funding. And during the Q&A part of this particular session, one woman stood up from the audience and she cleared her throat and she said to one particular grant maker, she said, "With all due respect, sir," you can kind of hear everybody going, because as soon as somebody starts with all due respect, the next words out of her mouth are going to be a surprise. "With all due respect, sir," she said, "I represent one of the best-known youth service organizations in the country, the local chapter. We are one of the largest chapters of this organization nationwide." She gave the organization's name. You would all recognize it instantly. She said, "We are a perfect match for your primary funding focus, but we have sent you proposals every year for the last 6 years, and not once have you funded our organization. You've never made a grant to fund our organization. And I'm here to find out why." You could have heard a pin drop in the room at that point. But that gentleman, bless his heart, he stood right there. He listened to what she said, and here was what his response was. He looked her straight in the eye and he said, "Make no mistake, ma'am, we do not give grants to support your organization." Well, now you really did hear the whole room go, "Oh, is he blacklisting her? What's he saying?" "Make no mistake, ma'am, we do not give grants to support your organization." And then he went on to say, "We give grants to invest through your organization in creating change in the community." So think about that. We give grants to invest through your organization in creating change in the community. Does that sound like an ATM machine? Does that sound like a jackpot? I don't think so. There's something else going on there. What is that? What is that teaching us? What's that inviting us into in terms of the way we think about engaging with the quote-unquote grant makers? The grant makers' mission is to give grants to invest through the nonprofits in creating change in the community. The grant makers' mission is to partner with you in creating change in the community.